What if the biggest threat to your health isn't aging, but it's metabolic disease, a process that's quietly building for decades? What do we do about that?
All right. So let's talk about metabolic disease. Well, what is metabolic disease? What is metabolic health? What does all that mean? People talk about there we have a metabolically healthy or a metabolically not healthy. I'm going to make this really simple. And I keep it simple for myself because it helps me try to manage how do I try to stay metabolically healthy. Metabolic health is how well your body produces and uses energy. That's it. Just think of it that way. How is it using and producing energy? So let's think about just going back to our basic health class back in elementary school. How does our body get energy? Well, we get it by eating our food, right? So when your body eats food, what are the units of energy that we need? The two big ones are fats and carbohydrates, specifically glucose and are the fats that we eat. How well does your body use that? So that's what we should think about when we think about metabolic disease. And another thing we could think about is all of us drive, or most of us are in some type of automobile or transportation. Well, what does the car use or the bus use to fuel it, right? Nowadays that we have a lot of cars that can actually utilize electricity straight from a battery, electric vehicles. We have cars that are still straight up internal combustion engines. And we have cars that are called hybrids that can utilize both gasoline and a battery for it to get its energy. And I'll always say it, your mechanic knows more about your car than your doctor knows about your body. And that's not a bad reflection of your doctor. It's just that the body is one of the most complicated things in the known universe. But we can make it simple as the owner of that body to have an owner's manual to see what's the best way for my body to use energy well. Because obviously, if you look at your car, if your car doesn't have good energy, it's not going to do well. I gave a story earlier in one of our podcast episodes where there was something wrong with the fuel pump in our family car and it could not go any farther, right? Well, you don't want that to happen, some version of that to happen to you. Unfortunately, it happens all the time.
Right.
Right.
So what does that look like?
Yeah.
It looks like a glucose of 400.
Right.
Okay.
Why is that a problem?
Yeah. What's going on when your glucose is 400?
Well, it ain't in your cells. That's for sure. It's in your blood instead of in your cells. Why could it not get into your cells where it's needed to be to transform into the energy that your cells can use? ATP. It needs ATP. So what happened? What happened was basically insulin wasn't working well. So that important fuel, like your fuel injector, if you have a clogged fuel injector, you ain't getting no combustion or you ain't getting it well, right? It's not getting into your cells. So poor cellular function. That is bad metabolic health. Good metabolic health is when you take in the fuel sources, your body converts that into the energy units it needs for it to function, whether it's your brain cell or your liver cell, your heart cell, all those cells need ATP. And if you don't have that, you have poor metabolic health. So what questions do we have about that?
How do we get good metabolic health?
Well, I just mentioned that you need to have insulin work well. There's no way around that. You want insulin sensitivity or insulin effectiveness, which insulin is the master regulator of your body's energy stores. Now, in a lot of cells, it's directly needed to get the glucose into the cell. And so when you have a glucose of 400 in your blood, the glucose did not get into where it needed to be. So you have poor cellular function, and you also have damage because when you have high blood glucose, it sticks to all the stuff, causes problems in your heart and your kidneys and your brain. Even in the brain, where glucose metabolism is a bit more complicated, and we don't have to get into that. It's not doesn't work as directly like it does in some other cells, but insulin acts as a regulator of brain energy production, right?
Now, to be metabolically healthy is not just about blood sugar and insulin sensitivity, correct? You also have to consider blood pressure and also cholesterol levels. So can you speak a little more on blood pressure and insulin sensitivity?
Well, blood pressure, one of the things that's really related to is if you have high insulin levels And why do you have high insulin levels? Because you're not metabolically healthy. Well, what does that have to do with high insulin? Your insulin doesn't work as much, so your body's producing more to get the same effect. And eventually that peters out. Now that's type 2 diabetes, right? People who have diabetes, who have insulin resistance, have a hard time with blood pressure control. Again, it's underappreciated how much what they call essential hypertension, or basically we have high blood pressure. And I don't have an exact reason why. It's just because your vessels getting stiffer. Well, that's not always true. If you have something like, if the artery that goes to your kidney, if that's squeezed, then your body can produce high blood pressure numbers from that. But when you have that high blood sugar in your blood vessels, that leads to the increase in heart disease. It can, and I don't want to get too complicated here, but if that system isn't running well, you're going to have things like fatty liver. You're going to have things like high triglycerides. It just downstream, all these things get clogged. So you've got to have insulin sensitivity, and you got to try to avoid excessively high insulin levels, right? Because insulin is the master regulator of how fuel is used, right? How if that fuel just sits and sludges out outside the cells where it needs to be inside the cells, the insulin controls that, right? So how do we get insulin to work well? Well, it goes right to the 3 pillars of physical health. I'm going to repeat this over and over again. And that's, you need to eat right, you need to sleep right, and you need to move right. All 3 of those have impacts on how well insulin works in your body. Even a type 1 diabetic that no longer produces insulin, you don't want them to lose their insulin sensitivity, right? Because sometimes you'll hear of type 1s needing really high insulin levels to get normal blood sugars, right? That means they've lost insulin sensitivity. It's a lock and key mechanism for most cells, and you wear that lock and key mechanism out, and you need more insulin for the same effect. And it gets higher and higher. And the more insulin you have, the more inflammation and other things that you have downstream of that.
Which I think is pretty much the definition of metabolic disease, is overall inflammation. In the body.
Yep. And high blood sugars. That's why
high blood sugars. Yeah.
That's right. Right now, one thing that's really in vogue, although it's kind of petering out a little bit, is what's called a CGM. What's a CGM? Continuous glucose monitor.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
People have built like platforms where you eat different foods and see, how does your body respond to this food? Some people, they'll eat a bunch of chickpeas, blood sugar is like 120 at first. Other people will go to 200 plus. And we all respond differently to different foods. But the idea is, if your blood sugar goes up too high too fast, that means you're not metabolically healthy. You need to do something about that, whether it's adjust your food, make sure you sleep right, make sure you move right. Again, I'm going to repeat that again. Let's not make this too complicated. Eat right, sleep right, move right. That looks a little bit different for each one of us. All right. Find the right diet, make sure you can sleep, get your sleep. Sleep is very critical, and make sure you move right. We have episodes that go into details of all 3 of those things.
I think those would be the 3 takeaways.
Absolutely.
for this episode. Yeah.
I loved sharing our experiences, because we come from different backgrounds, right? But those 3 things, again, it looks a little different for each one of us. But those are, I would say, key takeaways. I would also say they're non-negotiables. Food, sleep, movement.
It's simple, but not easy. In our society.
Yep.
It's very simple, but that's not easy in our society, where we run so hard, we don't sleep. We're in such a hurry that processed foods are easy. So it's simple, but not easy.
There's devils everywhere. Friday at our work, some jerk brought these amazing looking donuts. They were fancy pants donuts too. They weren't just Krispy Kremes. They are artisanal donuts.
Hard to say no to one of those.
It sure is.
It is.
What other questions do you guys have about any? I know that went into some physiology there, but again, you want your insulin to work well. You don't want your blood sugars to go too high. Those go hand in hand. John's questions about your blood lipids and also your blood pressure, though they're all related to each other. So if you take care of one, usually the other one's going to get in alignment better with what you want for good overall health.
Well, that lines up with what we see at the hospital for sure. I mean, high glucose, high blood pressure, and high cholesterol. Every patient has them, all three of them.
Right.
How about the relationship between weight gain and insulin sensitivity?
Good question. So the more weight you gain, especially like things like adipose tissue, right? The more the insulin resistant you get, the less your body is sensitive to insulin, right? When we talk about resistance training, one key component of that is you increase your muscle mass. Muscle is very sensitive to glucose. In fact, you don't even need insulin to shuttle glucose into your muscle cells when you move. You'll hear from women who are getting glucose tolerance tests, and that is a test to see, are you becoming insulin resistant because you're pregnant, right? And that has implications for mother and a baby during pregnancy, right? Those women would climb up or go up a couple of flights of stairs and blood sugar would go to normal, right? That's an example of getting your blood sugar down in normal levels. The importance of muscle mass, the more muscle you have on you, the better that process works and the less your body needs the same amount of insulin. It's giving your body this reservoir or this sink to put glucose into that helps you metabolically. That's why resistance training is such an important thing. And that's also why cardiovascular training, because getting your heart rate up and being able to sustain that's another aspect of that as well.
All right. So metabolic health isn't just about metabolism. It's about how well your body works. Correct?
Correct. Think of your car on the gasoline, or you want to be a hybrid. You want to be able to burn different kind of fuel, right? So be flexible and be well powered and well fed, so you can be doing the movements you need to do and to feel all your cells so they can get the energy that they need.
Okay. Well, if you like this content, follow us, like us, and share this episode with somebody you love.
Thanks so much for watching. We hope this episode gave you powerful, practical health tips you can actually use. If you enjoyed this content, give us a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. It really helps our channel and podcast grow. And don't forget to follow us on YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook so you never miss an episode. When you support us, you're helping more people just like you get access to real, helpful health information. Let's grow together and live a health yeah life.